Good morning and welcome to this webinar. I'm Sarah Lawadi, European Policy Manager at FTA, and I'll be presenting this webinar today together with my colleague Alex Veach, who's FTA's Head of Global Policy. Let's have a look at our agenda for today. As usual, we'll start with an update on the current status of negotiations, and we'll then move into preparedness territory with an overview of the no-deal notices published by the government, and Alex will provide a much more detailed briefing on aviation. Before we start, I'd like to share a few house rules about this webinar. Please keep your microphone or telephone muted so as to avoid any background noise. The webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available on the FTA website in a few days. I'm afraid we won't be able to deal with any technical issues during the webinar, but as it is recorded, if you miss anything of what we're saying today, you can find the recording on the website later. If you have questions, you can use the chat box of the webinar device to ask any questions. We will take the questions at the end if we have time. If not, we'll note them down and get back to you after the webinar. So let's dive in. I'd like to start with an update on the state of play of negotiations. Brexit and a backstop, or a hybrid backstop, or a temporary backstop, or even a backstop to a backstop have been all over the press since last week. So there's a lot of noise in the media, but ultimately it boils down to something quite basic, which is that there's not much progress on the difficult issues. You know that the withdrawal agreement is a legal instrument that would secure a transition period. Well, most of its content is agreed upon since March, for example, on citizens' rights or on a transition period indeed. At least on the principle. But there are still unsolved issues, and these stumbling blocks are jeopardizing the whole thing because nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. The biggest issue is the Irish border. Both sides agree there shouldn't be a hard border on the island of Ireland, but the respective red lines in the UK and on the EU 27 side are incompatible with one another if we are to avoid a hard border. The EU insists on having a system in place to avoid checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in case this result can't be achieved through the overall future relationship between the UK as a whole and the EU. And from the EU's perspective, what matters is that it is an all-weather solution. If the overall UK-wide solution can be in place at the end of the transition period, the EU 27 doesn't expect the backstop to kick in. But if there is a gap between the end of the transition period and the future arrangements, or if the future UK-wide arrangements do not exclude a hard border, then the backstop would be needed. And the EU 27 want legal reassurance for that now in the withdrawal agreement. That's the objective of the backstop. To achieve that, it means that the backstop would keep Northern Ireland in the customs union, regardless of what happens to Great Britain. The logical consequence is either to shift the border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, with Great Britain not in the customs union, or to keep the whole country in the customs union. And in either case, it crosses the UK red lines, hence the stalemate. It seems very difficult to overcome this issue because the principle of avoiding a hard border has been legally agreed on both sides back in December last year. And it seems that the only possible way forward is not acceptable to Theresa May and DUP because it would create divergence between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. This is the problem negotiators are facing. This week's EU summit, which was once expected to be the breakthrough moment, hasn't delivered anything tangible. Yesterday, Mrs. May gave a 15-minute presentation to EU leaders in Brussels, after which they discussed Brexit preparedness without Mrs. May, but there was no decision, no announcement, and no extraordinary summit will be planned in November unless the EU27 negotiating team considers that there is enough progress for such an extraordinary summit to be meaningful. So it will be up to Michel Barnier and his task force to decide if there is an extraordinary summit or not. If not, the next opportunity for EU leaders to discuss it will be the next planned summit in December, which is quite late in the process and which would postpone by a few months the time by which we will have certainty or at least more information on what will happen. This is the state of play. In the last webinar, we had already told you that no deal was the most likely outcome, and I'm afraid that it's even more likely now. FTA continues pressing for a deal, if need be for a standalone emergency transport agreement, but we must also advise you to prepare for no deal. And the focus of today's webinar will very much be about no deal preparedness. To prepare for no deal, the first thing you can do is to read the UK government's no deal notices. Since mid-August, more than 100 notices have been published. And what is it exactly? What's a no deal notice? Well, these documents outline the consequences of leaving without a deal. They explore options that do not require an agreement when such options exist, and they provide some guidance for companies. So with more than 100 documents, I'm aware that there's a lot of information out there. So let me give you an overview of the topics covered in these documents to help you identify the most relevant ones for you. I think the most relevant notices can be classified in 3 categories. First, the cross-cutting trade topics. Most of their content is relevant regardless of the sector you work in and regardless of the type of products you are importing, exporting, or carrying. In the previous webinar, Alex presented the customs no deal paper, which would be part of this first category. And I also gave you an overview of the one on importing and exporting goods. Please have a look at the others in this category, the other cross-cutting trade documents. These are quite important, and you should at least make sure that you know what's covered in the documents and you know in which areas you have to consider taking actions. In the second category, you will find information about trading specific types of products. For example, the notices on sanitary and phytosanitary checks will be relevant if you import, export, or carry agri-food products. There is also a specific notice about exporting objects of cultural interest, which can be important for some FTA members and some specialized companies. And there are a number of other specialized areas for which you will find documents in the gov.uk website. And last but not least, you have a series of notices on transport covering all modes. We talked about driving licenses and road haulage in the previous webinar. Since then, more papers were published, for example, on vehicle insurance. Just a few words on that, on insurance. If there is no deal, a green card will be required for each vehicle as a proof of insurance when abroad. So it doesn't mean you have to purchase an additional insurance policy, but you do have to require a green card for each vehicle from your insurance provider. That's just an example of the type of information you will find there. We can't analyze everything during this webinar, of course, but most transport topics have been covered in our Brexit Digest. And I strongly encourage you to have a look at the list of all notices so as to identify those that are relevant to your business. Some of them may not be on this slide, so you will find everything on the gov.uk website through the link that is on the slide, which is on screen now. But as I said at the beginning, we'd like to use this webinar to focus specifically on the aviation paper, and Alex is now going to take you through the implications of no deal in this area.
Great, thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent introduction to everything, and as you said, I'll be taking us through some more detail on the aviation side. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. In terms of the contents of my presentation, there are three separate no-deal technical notices on aviation. I will cover the key topics, focusing, of course, on air cargo. I won't be saying all that much about passengers here, as you could imagine. And I just want to flag up right at the top here that we do have a dedicated air cargo area of work at FTA. We offer policy and regulatory advice. We have an active members meeting. We also have a training company within our business that offers advice on dangerous goods and air cargo security training. So, please do get in touch. This is a highlight of these no deal notices. But if you are in the air cargo field, please do contact us and see if we can support and advise you going forward. Okay, so with that said, can we go to the next slide, please, Sarah? Okay, so diving straight in, this is the sort of the issue that gets the most press attention, and it's laid out pretty starkly in the no deal notices. So, and now as it says on the screen, with no deal after Brexit, UK and EU licensed airlines would lose the automatic right to operate between each other's territories. And I think the operative word there is automatic. So what would need to happen is the UK and the EU would need to seek permission from each other to have air links to each other's countries. I think it's worth stressing that, and this will come out a lot in this presentation, that in the no deal notices, the UK is very keen to talk about the workarounds, what Sarah referred to as a kind of special transport agreement. And so on this one, the UK is envisaging granting permission to EU airlines to continue to operate, and they would expect EU countries to reciprocate in turn, given that it's not in the interest of either the EU or the UK to restrict the choice of destinations. But the trouble is that can't be guaranteed. So, it says there could be disruption to some flights. And then the no deal notice goes on to say that the UK would prefer some kind of multilateral deal with the EU, but alternatively, bilateral arrangements between the UK and individual EU countries. Now, in the UK technical notice, it says that the EC, the European Commission, has acknowledged that what they call a bare bones agreement on air services would be desirable. It's not for me to speculate, but that would be an absolute essential to keep both cargo and passenger air travel moving. And I think I speak for everyone, probably everyone on this call, to say we hope that both sides can at least agree to that. Before we move on, just to finish up, that this would also mean that any rights of cabotage are lost. So you wouldn't be able to operate within intra-EU or intra-the UK if you weren't registered in each other's territories. Okay, so can we go to the next slide, please, Sarah? The next stage of this is about flights to and from the UK to the rest of the world, which is what ROW stands for. I think there's been a lot, again, in the press about this too. One thing that I thought was very interesting in the technical notice is that there are 17 non-EU countries for whom air services agreements are provided for by virtue of the UK's membership of the EU. So I think what the UK is trying to do here is kind of calm the waters a bit and say, look, we've in terms of the rest of the world flights, we've got 17 what they call air service agreements to make sure that flights can continue to operate with the various detailed regulations that you have to comply with in the aviation world. And so, it says, in some of the detailed technical notice that, quote, the UK has already agreed a number of these agreements and is confident the remaining agreements will be agreed well in advance of the UK leaving the EU. So you know, we are completely in the hands of the government here, and indeed would hope that that is the case. Okay, next slide there, please, Sarah. Aviation safety. You know, this is a whole special subject on its own, but essentially, you know, many organisations and personnel have to be certified, approved, or licensed before they can undertake activities involving UK registered aircraft. And under the Chicago Convention, most certificates are to the state of registration of the aircraft. And so, you know, we are leaving a world of full mutual recognition of safety certificates issued by EU member states. So, you know, as we will no longer be one of those, you know, we have to come up to some agreement on how these certificates will be issued and recognised by each other's authorities. Now, as it says on the slide, the UK is taking, you know, personal view, a more rather pragmatic approach here, saying, you know, certificates issued by EASA or authorities within an EASA state would continue to be effective for 2 years. You know, there's a bit of detail there, unless it would otherwise have expired or any ongoing action. But leaving that aside, so after the 2 years, you'd get the you'd have to be have a new certificate issued by the CAA. Now, however, the EC position is, you know, I have to say again, personal view, rather less pragmatic. It's the information published so far indicates that certificates previously issued by the CAA before exit day would no longer be automatically accepted. And I think the UK government position is that those certificates would have been issued in accordance with EU rules, and indeed UK aviation will remain as safe the day after exit as it was the day before exit. So therefore, as it says on the rest of the slide, the UK encourages the EU to take reciprocal action. Now, again, this is where these no-deal notices sort of blur the line a bit between what would be the position on day one versus what could be agreed some kind of special transport agreement. But the stark reality is, on day one, if things go as they are today, then, you know, certificates issued by the CAA before exit day would no longer be automatically accepted in the EASA system. This is the European Aviation Safety Agency, meaning that any operator, any business, any undertaking with such a certificate would have to get another one from an EU member state instead before they could operate. So again, a bit of a stark reality there, I'm afraid to say. And can we go on then, Sarah, to the next one? So I've got a couple of slides now where I just want to focus on the cargo security side, as you would expect from an FTA webinar. So in the air cargo security space here, we focus on the inbound cargo regime, whose acronym is ACC3. You'll see that on the slide. And what this means is that it requires carriers to hold a security designation granted by an EU member state in order to fly cargo to the EU. So that's the regime that we're talking about now. So, you know, the UK government position is that its air security regime should be recognised as equivalent by the EU. I think in a sign of good, I suppose, good faith, you could call it, the UK intends to recognise EU cargo security from the outset, and will not require new cargo security designation for carriers from the airports. But, it's possibly a big but, the UK would expect this recognition to be reciprocated. So, you know, trying to read between the lines here, is this really the sort of pragmatic look, trade moving, or is this a bargaining here to say, you recognise ours, we'll recognise yours? You know, I think a little bit of because the EU position, similar to the previous slide, is that the default position, carriers have to hold security designation from an EU member state, but the EU has not yet provided details of how carriers can actually apply for this. So, you know, I think, as the technical notice actually says, this would have significant implications for the EU air cargo industry. You know, it would mean a, albeit hopefully temporary, stop potentially on cargo being direct from the UK to the EU, and potentially vice versa, depending how the UK play it. Again, temporary to the extent of carriers would have to get certified from the EU. I have no idea, honestly, how long that would take, and that's something that we're very keen to try to get some more detail on from the EU and indeed the UK. Okay, so the next one, please, Sarah. And just to touch on this one as well, I talked in the previous slide about EU to UK or vice versa. What about cargo from the rest of the world? So there's a very interesting language in the notice. Okay, they say, quote, UK will not put any barriers in place to international trade. So similar to the previous slide, on the basis that the security designations are actually equivalent and robust, they anticipate putting UK designations on day one mirroring the EU ones. Now, i.e. no change, okay, but the EU's approach so far is to say that all UK granted designations for non-UK carriers expire on day one, and this is a problem. The way the EU system works is that member states work on behalf of the others to do these security designations. So this is actually 37 carriers for whom the UK provided the designation, 37 non-EU carriers, but also many quote-unquote screening entities. So this is all about screening the companies that do the screening, if you perhaps see what I mean there. So the impact on the supply chain is even more significant than just for these 37 carriers. And so the UK is calling for, in an ideal scenario, a special agreement to sort of recognise the fact that the aviation security system is as safe on day one of Brexit as it is on day zero of Brexit. And I think from a purely, not from a political point of view, purely from a pragmatic trade facilitation point of view, we hope that the EU agree with that. Okay, next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so there is a requirement for non-EU country airlines, third country operators, as they're called in the aviation jargon, to get a safety authorization from the European Aviation Safety Agency. And if there's no deal with EU exit, UK air carriers would become what they call third country operators, i.e. non-EU operators, and vice versa. So there'll be operators under the UK legislation. Now, I don't want to dwell on it too long. Suffice it to say that it's really the same problem here, that UK would give 2 years of grace, authorisations issued by EASA, the European Aviation Safety Authority. Any new ones would be done by the CAA. I think actually it's something I should have stressed a bit more in the slides as I went through. So for any UK domestic operators, the safety, the air safety regime will be managed and run through the Civil Aviation Authority, who provide all the same technical safety approval processes, security processes done by EASA. So yeah, forgive me, that's something I should have stressed before. But I've been focusing on the changes to the supply chain. So again, EU position is that they would not reciprocate that at present, and so they have to apply. EU airlines would have to apply to EASA for that third country operator certificate. I think one important bit of planning is that they really ought to show a little bit more detail on how that can be applied for. Okay, so last but not least, again, I will cover this at a very high level, again, very detailed issue. But this is about the products that go into aviation aircraft and other products. So there are a large number of different safety certificates issued to organisations and individuals involved in the design, production, maintenance, and operation of aircraft. So this is all about the details about which certificates would be recognised in the UK and the EU. there is a lot of detail that sits behind all this. Now, again, as I said before, and again with all these issues, functions performed by EASA at the moment in relation to approvals for UK products would be referred to the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority. The problem is the automatic mutual recognition of safety certificates. So the ones issued by the CAA are deemed equivalent to all the other ones issued by other member states. That would cease to apply. And again, I think we're in the same boat here of saying, even in no deal, and we have a special agreement on transport to conclude a mutual recognition agreement of some kind. Also, there are some bilateral arrangements the EU has negotiated in this area, and again, the EU is negotiating with those 3 countries to agree replacement bilateral arrangements. So that was a very quick gallop around the course of 3 no-deal technical notices. I hope I've succeeded to pick out the key issues. I would encourage those who want to get under the skin and work with other parties in the sector, across the aviation sector, to get in touch with us. We do have good representation across all different parts of the whole supply chain and logistics, including air, and we'd love to hear from you and work with you more closely. So with that, I will pass back to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for this very good overview of the implications of no deal for aviation. You know that FTA is a multimodal organization, so if you have more questions on aviation, you can contact Alex. If you have questions on maritime implications, you can consult the previous editions of the Brexit Digest, or you can contact me and ask specific questions. If you have questions about road transport and the implications of no deal in this area, I invite you to consider joining our International Road Transport Operator Conference. We organized a series of them. The first 2 already took place earlier this month, and we have a last session next week, close to Dartford, on the 24th of October. So there are still a few places left. You can still register. To give you an idea of the type of information that we will be providing in this conference, there will be a comprehensive Brexit session with information on different areas, including market access and permits for road haulage. So we will have a speaker from the Department for Transport, Rupesh Mehta, who's actually negotiating the transport arrangements within the context of Brexit. He will provide information on market access, so permits, as I said, but also driver requirements, such as CPC and driver licenses. He will say also, he will give you information about insurance in more details, and you will be able to ask him any questions on anything that could affect your business. There will also be a session on customs and the implications and responsibilities of hauliers in the area of customs, a session on EU employees in the UK and how you can communicate with them about the future. Will they be able to stay? What do they have to do to stay, etc. So we'll receive practical guidance on how to do that, and a comprehensive toolbox for hauliers on anything you need to know to start preparing now. So you can consult the full program and register online. You have the link on the slide. And if you have any more questions on the conference, please contact me. I'd be happy to give you more information and more details. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to update you on forthcoming FTA events and activities beyond this top conference. Of course, you have, as usual, the weekly Brexit Digest. We continue issuing that on a very regular basis. This is really the source of the most up-to-date information we can have. If you want to be added to the mailing list, please contact Pauline Bastidon using the email address you see on screen. I'd like to mention a few other activities related to Brexit. Next week, on the 24th, FTA will be giving oral evidence on the Northern Ireland backstop to the House of Commons. This is really the hot topic at the moment, the stumbling block that gets in the way of the transition period. So hopefully this evidence session will be useful. On the 1st of November, FTA will also give oral evidence on Brexit and road transport to the House of Lords. This is an evidence session organized by the EU Internal Market Subcommittee. So a lot of difficult questions and challenges regarding road haulage, such as access to the market. FTA's Deputy Chief Exec, James Hookham, will provide information to the Lords on this and defend your interests in this session. The next Brexit webinar will be on the 15th of November. You can register on the FTA website. And last but not least, on the 21st of November, the next customs group of FTA will convene in London. You can contact Alex for more information on this session. I'll leave it there for today. I don't think there are any questions. So thank you very much for your attention. As I said, the webinar is recorded and the recording will be put online. And if you have any more questions on any of the topics we touched upon today, please get in touch with us. Thank you very much.